I started work on the contract side of this with Nick, I think probably about 6 to 8 months ago. It's gone through a number of iterations, and we're pretty happy with where it is. We are just wrapping up the audit for the entire system with Guardian. They've done a really thorough job on this, and they're just checking up they're reviewing the remediations that we made, and hopefully in a couple of days we'll actually have the report finalized because that's going to be needed for the OCG proposal. So what I'm going to do is walk through like the overall actions, then talk about the how the system all fits together, and then some of the auction mechanisms and behaviors, because I think there is some complexity there, particularly with how it's configured, and I want to demonstrate or give some examples of what happens, in these different scenarios. I'm sure there will be questions that come out of it. There will be a Q&A session a little bit later on. So if feel free to put them into the chat, and then we'll kind of answer them all at once. I'm also happy to share this Excel or draw this presentation later if someone wants to go over it. So the starting point for the entire CD convertible deposit system is, you bid. So you're supplying a deposit token. We're starting off with USDS. I just zoom in on this, right? When you supply that deposit token, you're actually engaging in an auction, which is infinite capacity. So there is a target that's set, but you can as long as someone is prepared to pay for it, they can engage in that auction. So you supply the deposit token. You have the ability to specify a minimum amount of ohm out. So that's a slippage check, effectively. And if that bid is successful, you will get a receipt token, which is minted 1-to-1 with the quantity of the deposit token, and a position record. So it's been mentioned a couple of times. I think maybe in some of the documentation or in the threads that this position record is initially non-transferable. It's a record within one of the contracts, but you can optionally mint it into an ERC 721 NFT in case you want to see the artwork, or you want to trade it, you want to transfer it, you can even split it. Actually, you can divide a particular position into two and give it to someone else, or just even move it across into a new wallet if you wish. And that position record contains a little bit of information that's relevant, the conversion expiry, so when you can convert to ohm, up until what date, the deposit amount that you put in, and then the ohm price that has been locked in and predetermined. And I will go into like how that ohm price is calculated in like one of the in a short while, because there is some complexity there. So once you've actually got that bid, what can you do with it? The first is you can convert at any point before expiry, and I'll go into these in a little bit more detail. You can redeem, which means you get 1-to-1 your deposit back, and then you can reclaim, which means that you can get your deposit. It's just another way of getting your deposit back, and I will go into a bit of detail on that. So the first one that I covered was convert. So you can take your receipt tokens and your position, and if it makes sense given the market conditions, perhaps that might be where you have locked in a price during the auction of $25, and which means you are effectively buying 1 ohm for $25, but the market price is 30, then you're buying at $5 below the market price effectively. So that's when it might make sense to convert. So this can be done any point before expiry. Now that expiry date is set to be the deposit period. So we are going to have a couple of deposit periods available, 1, 2, and 3. At the current time, it's 1, 2, and 3 months. And what that means is at the time that you purchase, you kind of bid on the convertible deposit, your conversion window will be that bid date plus 1 month or 2 months or 3 months, and you can choose which one of those you engage in. And what it does when you convert is it will mint the ohm to you as the position owner, and the deposit that you have provided at the time of bidding will be transferred into the treasury. One thing I'll note about all of this is that all of the deposits that come in at the bid stage, these are not held in the treasury. They are custodied separately, and I'll show you exactly how that is architected. And so what we're doing is we are keeping the deposited funds entirely separate. Governance cannot access them. The protocol contracts cannot access them, and the DAO MS or emergency MS cannot access them either. And that was very deliberate that no one should worry that through some action, their funds can be accessed by someone, except for the person that actually deposited them. Right. So we've talked about bid, we've talked about conversion. The next option is redemption. And so this is where you are getting your initial deposit back on a one-to-one basis. This can be done at any time before the conversion expiry, after the conversion expiry. You can you need to provide the receipt tokens. This actually doesn't need a position. And so what this means is that you can even transfer the receipt tokens to someone else. You can sell them on a through a liquidity pool. You can just sell them OTC. There's a lot of flexibility there, and I think there's a lot of opportunities for arbitrage as well. So you just have to provide the receipt tokens, and on a one-to-one basis, it will give you back what you deposited. However, there is a waiting period. So if you have entered or bid on the auction for a 1 month deposit period, from the date that you start redemption, there will be a 1 month waiting period to get the deposited funds back. If it's a 2 month deposit period, there'll be a 2 month waiting period. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. One, I guess, bone that we're throwing here is that if you have started that redemption process, you can borrow against that deposit. Now, initially, this isn't going to be enabled. We're kind of doing a gradual rollout. But when that is enabled, you will be able to borrow up to a certain percentage of the receipt tokens that are in that waiting period. And they are structured like cooler loans. So there is obviously the LTV, there's a interest rate, and it's fixed term. So, and that's kind of pegged to your deposit period. So you can obviously repay it at any time. You can extend it if you want. And then once you've fully repaid the loan, including the interest, then you can finish the redemption and get your underlying deposit back. So this gives you an opportunity to generate yield on your stablecoin deposit during that redemption period. And if we zoom out, last main action is reclaim. So this is similar to redemption, where you provide the receipt tokens. You don't need a position, but it will give you the underlying deposit tokens immediately. There is no waiting period on this, and you can do it at any time. But the catch is that there will be a discount. So based on the what's called the reclaim rate that governance sets, there will be a haircut. I think in the IRC we might have mentioned that it was 90%. So that means that if you deposit 100 USDS, you will get back 90 of that, and 10 will go to the protocol. And that's just a percentage that is applied at the time of reclaim. So those are the main actions here. There's obviously a lot of opportunities within this and playing around, and we're actually quite interested to see how, what people come up with and how they interact with the system. So let me move on.
Jim, there was one question that actually came up, and
Yeah,
wanted
I
to see.
can answer that now.
Wagme asked, "Are all bids in an auction settled at the same price, or is there a bonding curve for each auction?"
It's a curve. It's a curve. So it is settled instantly. And I'll explain the mechanic of how it works actually. And this is why it also differs a lot from I think from the way that we have approached this previously. So one is there is a delay with with the bonds that we've previously had. It was always immediate. There was no vesting on it. But because we give you that you can convert at any time, but it's unlikely that the price that you get is going to be with the current market price. So you'll wait for that increase in the price, and that actually delays out the emissions or the minting of new ohm, which is an interesting dynamic there. But I will go into the auction, like effectively the bonding curve, uh, in a couple of minutes. In terms of how this all works together, what we do is we have a couple of fundamental contracts. So there's DPoS, it's a module that is actually in control of the positions. And there is some firewalling there. No one can no policy can come across and mess with the positions that have been created. I'd say the most important one is the deposit manager here. So this is actually what's custodying the deposited funds. And we have it's designed to be multi-asset. So initially, we're going to configure it to handle USDS and uh, wrap it or deposit it into the SUSDS vault. But later on, we can add different options as well. And what we also expect is that this contract here, the convertible deposit facility, it's one of many potential facilities that are going to interact with the deposit manager. There might be a V2, or there might be other variations of it. But later versions cannot access funds that have been deposited by other contracts. And so what that means is that your deposits are safe. No one else can access them. No one else can borrow too much or withdraw too much, leaving your receipt tokens under collateralized. We have a receipt token manager. This is minting your receipt tokens as ERC 6909s or as ERC20. And then the rest of the lift is done here by the mission manager, the convertible deposit auctioneer, and the facility. So the emission manager is very similar to what we had previously. Once per day, what it is doing is it figures out what is the target emission for the day, how much ohm do we want to sell. It figures out the current market price, and it will pass this onto the deposit auctioneer, which is responsible for actually running the auction. And what it does then is it breaks that target up into a smaller amount of ticks. If you're familiar with Uniswap v3, you may have heard that term before. So you have discrete ticks of a fixed number of ohm in each tick. And then when you add all of those up, it adds up to that day target. And the next kind of section is really on those auction mechanics. So the auctioneer is responsible for conducting that auction. That's what the front end interacts with. And then when it comes to delivery, minting the receipt tokens, and the creating the position, the convertible deposit facility is responsible for that. And that's kind of that and the redemption vault are the two contracts that post auction users will be interacting with. And this is designed in a way where we can swap them out later on. We can not upgrade, but introduce a new version of the redemption vault. We can introduce a new version of these contracts, but the underlying these three will largely not change because their functionality is locked. Any important questions around that, or I can move on to auction mechanics?
Keep cooking. Oh, wait. We
All
have a
right.
question. Duty said, hello, you mentioned that the token bid for CDs will be siloed in the treasury so that one can always redeem. Does that mean if USDS is set as the deposit token, the treasury would not stake the USDS to earn yield?
Okay, so slight misconception. They're not. Those funds are not held in the treasury. That's very deliberate. They're held in if someone bids through the auctioneer right here, it will end up in the deposit manager here, not the treasury, because we are very deliberately keeping it separate to the treasury because what's in the treasury are protocol funds and literally the protocol treasury, whereas these are funds that the protocol has no claim to. And so they are kept in the deposit manager. What is done is it depends on the configuration of the asset, but I will use the USDS example. What will happen is USDS will be configured to be deposited into the SUSDS, the savings USDS vault. So what that means is when a bid happens, it gets passed into the deposit or gets pulled in by the deposit manager. And the deposit manager will then stake that USDS into SUSDS. And then the balance of it is retained by the deposit manager. So there is yield being earned on that USDS while it is sitting there. I hope that answers the question. Okay, auction mechanics. Right, so as I mentioned, we have the emission manager, and once per day, it's passing a couple of pieces of information over to the auctioneer. The emission manager has a configuration parameter called the tick size, which is the number of ohm per tick. And that's one of the items that is passed over to the auctioneer. But we also have an ohm sales target. That works as before. It's based on the market price compared to backing or the liquid backing of backed ohm. And then there is a minimum price. And the minimum price, at least with the current configuration, will be the market price. And what that means is that the price of ohm is not going, the price of ohm sold through the auction will never drop below that. And then we have the auctioneer, which is configured to work with the deposit asset, in this case USDS, and it's configured with a tick step multiplier, which determines how the price changes as the active tick changes. So that will make a little bit more sense in just a second. But I wanted to highlight that these two configuration parameters are really important, and they change a lot of the behavior. And there's some parallels with liquidity pools there as well, at least Uniswap v3. Okay. So the auction capacity is made up of fixed size ticks. For example, I think we're starting with a tick size of 150 ohm. And the reason for that, by the way, this is mentioned, I think, in the RFC, but the reason for that is that when we did some analysis, thanks, Rowan, the average transaction, the average amount of ohm that was swapped in a transaction was around 150 ohm. And what that means is that if someone is buying using the CD system, they will get a single price with that bid. It won't be split across two ticks. So each bid is going to take capacity from one or more ticks, depending on the bid size. So if you were to bid a certain amount of USDS here and it fit within the tick one, then you'd just get it at a single price. But if it was a little bit more than that, you might get some ohm at 2250, and then you would get some ohm, the rest of the ohm at 22.67. And what would then happen is your conversion price would be the average of it, obviously weighted against the amount of ohm. And what you notice here is that all of these are the same size. The only difference is that as the tick number increases, the price also increases. So in this case, there's the same multiplier being applied to this. So 22.5 times, I think this might be a 0.75% increase between ticks. And then 22.83 is 0.75% more than 22.67. That makes sense. Any questions about this, actually, while we're at it?
We've got someone typing in chat. It is
Okay.
forever a gator. He said, fair to assume that tick capacity is first come, first served to bidders, question mark.
Yes, that's correct. And there's an interesting mechanism here that I will get onto as well. So I mentioned that there are two configuration parameters, the tick size and the tick step. There is a kind of an interaction between them. So when you have a small tick size, it's equivalent to thin liquidity in a tick, and it means that that tick capacity is going to be depleted very quickly. So, if you imagine there's 1 ohm in each tick, that tick, you're going to go through a lot of ticks if someone is trying to buy the rights to 100 ohm, and the price is going to increase pretty quickly. But what you can counter that by having a small tick step, for example, 0.75%, so the price increase is not so high. On the other hand, if you have a large tick size, it ends up being very, very thick liquidity, and the price is not going to move so quickly. And you can offset that by having a very large tick step. So we may end up through governance changing the configuration of the auction over time based on how we see it performing in the market, and based on certain outcomes. But I have a couple of examples here, and I've laid it out in the same way. So this is small tick size, 1 ohm, and 0.01% increase per tick. And so because of the small tick size, over a day where there, let's say, is 4,000 ohms sold, and we expect that that's kind of what the day target is going to be according to the emission manager, you go from the tick price being 22.5 up to somewhere around close to $50 or 50 USDS per ohm. Right? But if you ramp up that increase per tick from 0.01 to 0.05, it starts to go exponential. And with the same amount of ohms sold, you get to 100 and maybe 60 USDS per ohm. So that's quite a significant difference there. And the reason why I bring this up is that it can make a significant difference on just like a small tweak can affect the market quite significantly. And what we'd see here as a result is that we'd have, I think, dramatically less ohms sold per day because the price just rockets up. On the other hand, if we had a large tick size and 100 ohm with let's say 100 ohm per tick, but a 0.01 increase per tick, you see that the price barely moves. It maybe gets to 23. And that's probably not, if we're selling out the entire day's allocation or target of ohm, we probably want it to the price to move a little bit more than that. Whereas if you have the same tick size of 100 ohm, but a 1% increase per tick, it goes to, I think, $33, 33 USDS per ohm. What we've gone for, I think, what we've posted in the RFC is 150 ohm per tick and 0.75, which puts us, I think it was 27 at if at the end of the day, if all ohm is sold. And obviously this would change on a day-to-day basis because it's the first day might be that, but the second day would then have a different market price to base itself off. So just something to keep in mind. And then the last mechanism that relates to the auction and just generally the design of the system is that there is a price decay. So yes, the auction and the bidding is first come, first serve, but let's say the price rockets up and then no one wants to bid. What will happen is that the active tick and the price will start to decay. And the way it works is that there is capacity that is added, and when it reaches full capacity for a tick, it drops down in price. And you can kind of see this here, that if the price was at, I think it's $27, and there were no bids, over the course of 24 hours, it would drop down, and it would continue dropping down provided there are no bids, back to the minimum, which is in this case 22.5. What would be more likely is that somewhere in here it would hit an equilibrium, someone would bid, and then it would decay a little bit, and then someone would bid, and it would just kind of go up and down. And so what that means is that the auction is responding to the market behaviors and the market demand. If it's too high and no one's interested, it'll drop down until someone is interested. And yeah, that's the main, it's the design, that's the actions, and the auction mechanism for CDs.